The Sumerians didn't record history, they programmed reality. Those were the final, cryptic words of Assyriologist Samuel Noah Kramer, words that sent shivers through everyone who heard them. After decades spent decoding ancient tablets, Kramer claimed he had found something humanity was never meant to see. His notes spoke of symbols that shaped minds, of rituals hidden beneath language itself. In his last days, he warned that the code still breathes, buried not in clay, but in us. The confession that shook history. Kramer's story began far from the ancient ruins of Mesopotamia. He was born on September 28, 1807, in a small town called Jashkiv, in what was then the Russian Empire. His childhood was marked by fear, as his Jewish family fled the violent pogroms under Tsar Nicholas II. They sought safety in Philadelphia, a place that promised peace but demanded hard work. There, the young Samuel grew curious about the mysteries of the past, about how civilizations rose and fell, and why humanity kept searching for meaning. He studied tirelessly, graduating from Temple University in 1921 and later earning his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. Under the mentorship of Ephraim Avigdor Spicer, he began to explore the forgotten language of the Sumerians, the people who lived in Mesopotamia over 4,000 years ago. What started as an academic pursuit soon became an obsession. Kramer joined the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago and later returned to Pennsylvania, where he would spend decades reconstructing a lost world from fragments of clay. By the 1950s, Kramer had already translated thousands of Sumerian tablets. His discoveries filled museums and textbooks, revealing the first schools, laws, poems, and prayers. He brought to life the world's earliest myths, stories of gods, kings, and creation. Yet, as he dug deeper, something about those tablets began to trouble him. The more he read, the more he felt that the Sumerians were not just recording life, they were engineering it. Their writing system, the cuneiform script, did more than preserve words. It defined them. Each sign held power, the power to shape behavior, belief, and even memory. Kramer started to see patterns, recurring phrases, and encoded structures that suggested the Sumerians understood something profound about the link between language and control. He noticed that the earliest records were not about trade or poetry, but about obedience, offerings, and divine authority. The tablets spoke of gods who demanded order and kings who ruled by divine decree. These were not simply administrative notes, they were tools of social programming. Through writing, belief was no longer a matter of personal faith. It was law, carved into clay. In his later years, Kramer became increasingly haunted by what he found. He once hinted that the origins of human civilization might also mark the beginning of something else, the birth of systematic control through symbols. "We learned to write," he said, "but we also learned to obey what was written." His most famous book, The Sumerians, Their History, Culture, and Character, remains a cornerstone of archaeology. Yet buried between its scholarly lines lies a silent warning that the first civilization may have created not only knowledge, but the very chains of thought that still bind us today. Let's tell you, what exactly did Dr. Kramer see in those ancient tablets that made him fear his own discovery? The sentences that wouldn't let go. Dr. Samuel Noah Kramer had spent years studying the grand tales of gods and kings. But one day, his attention drifted from the heroic to the ordinary. Instead of focusing on myths or royal decrees, he turned his gaze toward something most historians ignored: the dull-looking tablets filled with grain lists, trade accounts, and school exercises. At first, they seemed harmless, nothing more than records of daily life. But the deeper he read, the more he sensed something was wrong. The words on those tablets refused to leave his mind. He began to notice that these records were not as secular as they appeared. Even in the most routine transactions, strange patterns emerged. Words used for religious offerings appeared in lists of crops. Sacred phrases once reserved for temple rituals crept into simple market contracts. It was as if the language of the gods had silently taken over every aspect of Sumerian life, from the prayers they whispered to the prices they paid. The article Scribes in Ancient Mesopotamia helped explain this shift. It described how scribes, once responsible only for counting grain or measuring land, gradually became the keepers of every written thought. They worked for temples, palaces, and merchants alike. What began as bookkeeping turned into a system of control. Every promise, every agreement, every word had to be written, and once written, It could not be questioned. Kramer's earlier book, Sumerian Literature, a preliminary survey of the oldest literature in the world, had already hinted at this strange blending of the sacred and the mundane. But now, faced with tablet after tablet, he began to realize how complete that blending was. In Sumer, myth was not something told around fires. It was the blueprint of life itself. The same divine order that shaped their temples also shaped their trade and taxes. Kramer started to see that writing, for the Sumerians, was never just a record of reality. It created reality. By writing something down, they gave it permanence and power. They built a civilization that literally thought itself into existence through words. When a scribe wrote that the gods blessed a transaction, that statement wasn't symbolic. It became fact sealed in clay. As Kramer read further, a thought began to disturb him. If their words could define their world, then language itself had been humanity's first form of architecture. Every sentence, every symbol, every repeated phrase was a brick in a structure that no one could see, but everyone lived inside. The Sumerians had built not just cities and temples, they had built a mental world where belief and bureaucracy were one. The sentences haunted Kramer long after he put the tablets away. They seemed alive, echoing through time, whispering the same truth again and again, that words can rule as firmly as kings. And if that was true, Kramer wondered, then what about their monuments? Could the same hidden code, the same patterns of control, be carved not only in clay, but in stone? The ziggurat, a text you could climb. Kramer's eyes turned from the fragile pieces of clay scattered across museum tables to the massive stepped structures that still rose from the Mesopotamian plains. These were the ziggurats, ancient temples built in layers, stretching toward the heavens. In the Sumerians, Kramer explored how deeply connected Sumerian religion, society, and architecture truly were. The ziggurat of for example, was not just a temple. Its every step, terrace, and chamber symbolized a layer of the cosmos, from the dust of the earth below to the skies above where the divine presided. It was a model of creation itself, a physical expression of myth. Kramer began to imagine what it must have felt like to climb one. A priest or ruler walking up those giant steps was not simply ascending stone. He was reenacting the Sumerian story of existence. Each level brought him closer to the gods, and each level reaffirmed his own place in the cosmic hierarchy. The people who gathered below saw this journey as sacred. They were witnessing a living version of the stories written on their tablets, the myths of order, power, and divine authority, made real in front of their eyes. According to research from the Smithsonian Institution, early writing and early architecture in Mesopotamia grew together as part of the same civilizational toolkit. Both were systems of organization, one built with symbols, the other with stone. In Kramer's view, they shared a single purpose: to make belief tangible and unchanging. A ziggurat was like a sentence that could not be erased. Once built, it stood as a reminder of divine law and human obedience. The parallels were striking. Just as the Sumerians wrote the names of gods and kings in clay, they carved those same hierarchies into the skyline. The base of the ziggurat represented the mortal world where humans labored and obeyed. The middle layers reflected the spiritual realm where priests served and mediated. And at the summit, a small temple waited, the dwelling place of the gods themselves. To climb it was to read the world in stone. Kramer called it a text you could climb. And once you see it that way, the ziggurat becomes more than a ruin. It becomes a message. A coded monument meant to teach every generation the same lesson, that order comes from above, and that the divine and the political are one and the same. But this realization left Kramer uneasy. If the ziggurat carried such a powerful message, then who was responsible for protecting it? Who controlled this divine architecture? And how was its message preserved long after the gods fell silent? Scribes who ruled through words. If the ziggurat was a text you could climb, then the scribes were the ones who wrote the world it stood upon. Dr. Samuel Noah Kramer began to see that the true rulers of ancient Sumer were not always kings draped in gold or priests chanting before the gods. They were the men who held the stylus. Quiet, disciplined, and often unseen, these scribes shaped civilizations one clay tablet at a time. Their story began in the cradle of writing itself, Sumer, where the first marks were pressed into wet clay over 5,000 years ago. At first, these marks were simple, used for counting grain or keeping track of livestock. But soon, as temples grew and cities expanded, the scribes' role changed. According to the World History Encyclopedia, scribes became the heart of every institution, temple, palace, and village alike. They did more than record history. They created it. Kramer discovered that to become a scribe was to enter a sacred order. Education was harsh and demanding. The text Scribal Education in Ancient Babylonia by Douglas R. Frayne describes how young apprentices studied from sunrise to sunset. They learned to read, write, calculate, and memorize long hymns. They copied myths, royal decrees, and contracts until their hands ached and their minds could think only in cuneiform. To the Sumerians, knowledge was not free. It was something earned through repetition and ritual, guarded like a secret. Over time, this small group of literate men became indispensable. They were the keepers of records, the interpreters of divine will, and the voice of authority. Kings might issue commands, but it was the scribes who wrote them into law. Priests might speak to the gods, but it was the scribes who recorded their revelations. Every land deal, every ceremony, every myth depended on their stylus. They were, as Kramer realized, the hidden architects of belief. What fascinated Kramer most was how their writing blurred the line between the sacred and the practical. A contract about trade might begin with a prayer. A royal order could echo a hymn. Even the simplest line carried weight, because the written word itself was thought to possess divine power. Literacy was not just a skill, it was control. Whoever could write could shape reality, and whoever shaped reality ruled. But then, amid thousands of tablets, Kramer began to notice something strange. A rhythm. A pattern that appeared again and again in hymns, in mathematical exercises, even in architectural designs. It was as if the scribes had discovered a hidden formula that linked every part of their world together. At first, he thought it might be coincidence, but the repetition was too precise, too deliberate. It seemed to suggest that beneath the surface of their writing lay an ancient code, a mathematical rhythm connecting language, architecture, and belief. Kramer was about to uncover a secret that even the scribes themselves might not have fully understood: the pattern in the clay. Within the dense lines of cuneiform, Kramer started to see recurring numbers: 3, 7, 12, 60, the same figures that appeared in myths of creation, in temple hymns, in tax records, and in astronomical charts. To most, these were just ordinary quantities, but to Kramer, they formed a rhythm, a silent mathematics that pulsed beneath the surface of Sumerian civilization. It revealed the extraordinary sophistication of early Sumerian mathematics more than 4,000 years ago. The concept of calculating the seventh power of 4/3 showed that these ancient scholars were not just counting harvests, they were measuring patterns of growth, time, and value in ways that seemed eerily advanced. Another study, 2 Sumerian words of fractions in Babylonian mathematics, explored how the terms eg-ngal and eg-tn, words for ratios and proportions, originally came from non-mathematical language. These weren't just numbers, they were symbols of relationships, balance, and order woven into daily life. Kramer realized that Sumerian mathematics was never purely practical, it was spiritual. The same numerical sequences governed everything from temple architecture to ritual chants. The number 7 appeared in myths about divine judgment and cosmic renewal. The number 12 shaped calendars and religious cycles. And 60, their base system, reflected the movement of stars and planets, tying human law to the heavens. To Kramer, it began to look like the Sumerians had built their entire world, their faith, their cities, even their thinking, around a kind of sacred arithmetic. Numbers were not tools. They were the architecture of belief. Every ratio, every repetition, every pattern encoded the idea that human life had to mirror the structure of the cosmos. He once wrote that writing made civilization possible. But now he saw something deeper. Writing was not just communication, it was programming, a language that didn't just describe reality, but shaped it. The scribes weren't merely record keepers, they were early coders of consciousness, using mathematics to synchronize society with divine order. As Kramer pieced together his final notes, he grew silent. The clay tablets that had once seemed like relics of the past now felt like instructions, fragments of an ancient system that still whispered through human culture. He began to suspect that civilization itself might be the result of a repeating code, passed down, refined, and rewritten age after age. And that was the truth behind his final confession. Before his death, Kramer warned that the Sumerians had done more than invent writing and mathematics. They had found a way to bind reality to symbols, to make the universe obey language. He feared we had never stopped using that code. Kramer's terrifying last revelation. In his later years, surrounded by shelves of ancient texts and half-translated tablets, Dr. Samuel Noah Kramer finally spoke the words that would define his legacy. His voice was thin but steady when he said, "The Sumerians discovered how words could create reality." It was not a metaphor, it was the terrifying truth he had pieced together from decades of studying the world's first written civilization. His book, The Sumerians, traced their influence across thousands of years, showing how their theology and ethics shaped cultures that came after, even echoing through the Hebrew Bible. But in his final reflections, he saw something darker beneath that legacy. He began to realize that civilization itself might have been built not on faith or discovery, but on control. Control hidden behind the beauty of language. Kramer's research revealed the crucial role the Sumerians played in the ascent of civilized man. The ascent of civilization, he realized, might have been the ascent of obedience, the slow surrender of human freedom to the authority of the written word. He described how the Sumerians' code of life worked like a script. Every citizen, every priest, every ruler played a role written long before they were born. To be literate was to have power, because the literate ones wrote the story everyone else lived by. If you can write the story, Kramer warned, you shape the world. And if you define the script, you steer the actors. In his final years, Kramer began to wonder if that code had ever truly vanished. He saw reflections of it in modern life, in laws, bureaucracies, media, and even the algorithms that now govern thought and behavior. The same logic that once turned clay into command now flows through screens and systems. The tools have changed, but the pattern remains. That was Kramer's last and most chilling insight, that we may still be living inside the story the Sumerians began to write. And the question that lingers, more unsettling than any he ever asked, is this: what if that ancient code never died and still governs the world we live in now? The legacy of the first code. When Dr. Samuel Noah Kramer passed away in 1990, he left behind far more than translations of clay tablets. He left behind a mirror held up to humanity itself. His discoveries about the Sumerians, the world's first literate civilization, changed how archaeologists, linguists, and historians understood not just ancient Mesopotamia, but the origins of everything we now call civilization. The reactions to his work were profound. Some praised him as a visionary who revived an entire lost world. Others found his final ideas unsettling, even frightening, for what they revealed about how deeply language and control intertwine. Archaeologists who followed Kramer's path began to see the Sumerians not just as an ancient culture, but as the architects of human order. Their discoveries confirm much of what Kramer had suggested, that Sumerian society had developed systems so advanced that they still echo in modern life. Excavations in Ur, Eridu, Lagash, and Nippur revealed a world built around meticulous organization. Every field, trade, and temple ritual was recorded. Their archives contained thousands of tablets detailing not just religion and politics, but law, astronomy, and even literature. The famous Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's earliest stories, was only one fragment of their broader worldview, a world where writing held power over reality itself. Kramer's claim that writing became authority gained new weight as scholars studied how literacy shaped early civilizations. Archaeologists found evidence that Sumerian scribes, trained in temple schools, were not simply record keepers, but enforcers of social order. They documented taxes, offerings, and royal decrees, creating a fixed structure of society that left little to chance. Later findings supported Kramer's view that writing was more than a tool of memory. It was a mechanism of control, used to define truth and enforce hierarchy. Modern researchers studying the evolution of language and power have often referenced Kramer's work when discussing how words shape human consciousness. His interpretation that Sumerians used writing to program belief no longer sounds like mere philosophy. Cognitive archaeologists now explore how symbols and abstract thought altered the human brain, how the ability to record and transmit meaning across generations changed our perception of time, morality, and authority. The Sumerians, according to modern understanding, were not just the first to invent writing, they were the first to construct a shared reality through it. Their cuneiform script transformed thought into permanence, turning spoken intention into binding truth. That act, fixing reality through language, became the foundation of everything that followed: law, religion, politics, even science. Humanity's progress, then, is inseparable from this first code, but so is its vulnerability. Kramer's warning that, to rule the mind, one needs only rule the symbols, feels increasingly prophetic in an age where digital codes and media shape our beliefs. The same system that once made civilization possible also created the structures of control that still define our lives. Archaeologists and historians today often describe Kramer's legacy as double-edged. He uncovered the brilliance of the first civilization, but also revealed the hidden cost of order, the surrender of truth to the written word. His work reminds us that every tool of progress carries the power to bind as well as to liberate. For humanity, the message remains timeless. The Sumerians may be gone, but their invention still rules us. We live inside the story they began to write. The real question is whether we can ever rewrite it. What do you think? Did the Sumerians truly shape the way we see reality today? Share your thoughts in the comments below.